There I am. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order and go over basically the outline of what we're going to do. So when I set this up, I opened up via email or to speak to talk about anything that you specifically wanted to be talked about as the public. I didn't receive any specifics. I had some people talk to me about things that are included in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip over, since there's no one wishing to speak, and go into the review of the legislation that was passed and considered by the 113th General Assembly for the 2023 session. Just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. The 113th General Assembly meets twice. The first session has finished. The second session will convene in January of next year and go through April or May. April if it's like this year. This year it did end a little early, but I've been able to participate in a couple of things. Mr. Groen and I were at the Tennessee School Board Association Legal Summit last week in Jackson. The class group has helped with a few different things, and then Scott Bennett has put together an amazing rundown for the board of the different bills that have passed. After that section where I review everything, I'm going to open the floor up to any board members' questions or comments or anything they want clarification on, and I will either answer those or find the necessary information to present at our meeting next week. And then at that point, if there has been a question addressed or something else that needs to go over, I will cover it and make any announcements that need and adjourn. So I'm going to dig right into it unless anybody has anything to start with. Nope. Okay. All right. So the Tennessee School Board budget for public schools passed by the 113th is $56.2 billion. Important notes of that: $140 million for one SRO at every school. Locally, we do remember that the Hamilton County Commission and this school board came together and pledged to put enough money to put an SSO in every one of our schools. This money will help with that ability, and we're still working on ways that we can layer ourselves together with the SSOs and SROs. Again, quick note: school safety officer is employed by Hamilton County Schools, is still somebody that has a firearm and has training with children at the school level. SROs are employed by the sheriff's office, very similar person. $40 million in school safety grants. Locally, that will be addressing needs of entry points and other necessary school access things. After that, I'm not going to go into public record about the actions that we're taking to keep the schools safe, but these grants will go a long way to ensure that we are making our students every bit as safe as we can possibly do. $120 million to increase teacher salary, $21.5 million for summer learning programs. That's important to note for the third grade retention law that I'll go back into in a moment, along with K through 3 support in tutoring and making sure that we are supporting the children all year long, especially the ones that need it the most. Now, going down into TISA funding, the base funds per student in this year's TISA funding is $6,860 a student. That money follows the student to the schools in which they will be in. Additional direct funding: rising fourth graders who were non-proficient but have not been retained due to the application process and getting tutoring will get another $500 a student to support those tutoring efforts. CTE program students, another $5,000 will follow them. Junior and senior ACT and ACT retake will get $186 towards that student. And then, as I mentioned earlier, K through 3 students, $500 will be following them for additional tutoring to support them to make sure that we're not having them fall into the third grade retention. So that brings us right into the third grade retention, Public Chapter 338. So as I mentioned in my first review, that was a very fluid time. There were more than 20 different bills that were proposed. At the end of the day, they narrowed it down to 14 that went into the K-12 subcommittee. Of those 14, only one passed, and that doesn't affect the students that just retook the TCAP or would be retained this year. It will take effect next year. What it does is it allows for more state-only issued testing to be utilized in order to find the proficiency of that rising fourth grader from third grade. Hopefully, this will make sure that the child that just took the TCAP bad that day has a better opportunity to not be retained and move on as they should, still allowing for us to define and find the ones that need help. We do have, again, on the back end, help with tutoring that will assist those fourth graders that are going to be able to get the help that they need moving into fourth grade and throughout the fourth grade. It does allow for, there's a couple of notations to it. We did get funding, at least for the next 3 years, to support us in tutoring and in assistance for the children that are K through 3 and that would be retained. And there's also allows for online tutoring for the LEA, which is us, the school district, to pick out up to 3 providers for online tutoring. And then the last part that's a note is next year as well, the school district itself, meaning the principals and or reading interventionalists or teachers, could intervene and apply for them to not be retained on behalf of the student with parental approval. That's really nice if there's someone that may have trouble navigating how to help their child, allowing for the school to help. Okay. I know that's a very little bit about the third grade retention that was talked about so much, but that really is the only changes to the law as it was. So going into school safety, which is public chapter 367, moves all of the suggestions that had been put forward by former General Assemblies into actual mandatory safety measures for our schools. Couple that I'll note, House Bill 457, which was sponsored by our own local Yusuf Hakim, expands the scope of law concerning sports safety, making sure that coaches have concussion safety, cardiac arrest care, undergoing CPR training to comply with their background checks. And it comes into play with something that's personal to my heart as well, as we ensure that all of our Hamilton County schools have a proper amount and ability to use AEDs throughout the schools. And the second one is on school safety. It adds to the zero tolerance policy. This is Public Chapter 229, Senate Bill 190. It allows for threats of mass violence on school property or functions to be considered a zero tolerance policy, falling in line with the rest of the zero tolerance items that were already there. And so, again, just the governor's office has had a real push to make sure that there is safety measures at the school building level. And a lot of these laws and measures are to do just that. Again, there's a lot of things that we're not going to say out loud about what we're doing to protect the children. But we do have a mandatory now safety plan that is reviewed by the state and local levels to make sure that we're on point. And then there's there are people that will be going around to ensure that that safety is being met. So the next thing is my academics and curriculum section. Public Chapter 269 allows for a student to test out of a class and receive credit after demonstrating knowledge of the materials at hand, as well, and this is an important part, removing any early graduation penalties. The reason that's important is if a child would graduate in December, that child would be considered off the rolls, and the monies that would be following that child weren't there to continue with the standard school day for the next semester. That now follows throughout the whole year. So Public Chapter 284 and 311 address things to do with keeping teachers and retaining new teachers. This allows for teaching candidates who are student teaching to be hired in as full-time teachers and accrue time towards their tenure as their student teaching. And then again, with the intention of keeping them in our system. The second part of this creates a pathway for honorably discharged veterans with a minimum of 3 years of relevant work experience within the last 5 years in their area of endorsement and seeking a teaching license. So if there is an honorably discharged veteran that is actively working to become a teacher, this allows them to get there a little bit quicker and to have them with some real-time experience. Public Chapter 399 The state is sponsoring 6 weeks, and again, it's important to note that this is from the state, so it won't be paid at the local level, is sponsoring 6 weeks of paid leave for any licensed employee of the school system after a birth, stillbirth, or adoption of a child. I think that's an awesome move to, again, help us retain our teachers and make sure that we're giving them the best care they can have and caring for them. House Bill 432 is establishing a Tennessee Future Teacher Scholarship, which rewards educators. There's a pilot in place for 5 years. The state's already budgeted it through 2028. Again, the intention is homegrown, making sure that our Tennessee community members that want to become teachers can do so and stay in our schools teaching our children. House Bill 1150, Department of Education is doing a statewide mandate and looking at preschool education and establishment of a task force for a strategic plan for preschool education to fall in line with some of the things that are going on in that level. The program will be going through next year to take notes. And then a big ticket item that only affected Hamilton County in this change is Public Chapter 328, the Education Savings Account, colloquially named the Vouchers Bill. The language is to, quote, include students who are zoned for a school district with 5 or more schools identified as priority schools in 2015, 2018, and 2021, and among the bottom 10% in 2017. So what that has done is added Hamilton County to Metro Nashville and Shelby, Memphis. There was talk of Knoxville being added in that, but that died in the Senate, went back to the House. They removed it, and it did pass. The second part of that is Public Chapter 171 that further expands those vouchers to all 3 of the areas I mentioned to add allowance for children that were or would have been enrolled in 1920, 2021, and 21-22 school years to be able to apply post. So, noting a couple of bills that failed. Well, I'm sorry, a bill that failed and one that was removed on purpose. So, Senate Bill 1374, House Bill 423 was a funding for nurses. It required 1 full-time nurse for every 750 students. It did not make it out of K-12 subcommittee. There was a lot of different issues with the ability to pay and attract the staff that we needed for those. But it is not something that, it's something that I foresee coming back in a different form. So it will be something we'll probably be talking about next year. And then the second one of note, because it was a big, it was a hot ticket item for House Speaker Sexton, brought up a few times. He was going to create a task force to review the federal funding that Tennessee receives for education, but the Speaker was informed and able to create the task force without the need of a vote. So that task force has been created to figure out, to essentially look into what funds are brought from the federal government to Tennessee for education. And we will be able to see the findings of that. Those are the big ticket items that I had on there. Again, I opened it up first to the community, and these are the ones that we wanted to hear about. And then I opened it up to the board also if there's a specific item that they'd like to hear more about or go into further detail. Mr. Graham?
I just want to say you did a really succinct presentation.
Thank you.
You know.
Thank you.
Yeah, we went through like 6 hours, 7 hours of this stuff. So,
Drilled down to the important stuff.
oh yeah.
And I wanted to make sure I took out any politics. This is absolutely meant to be delivered as this is what happened, and this is how it affects us in Hamilton County. This is without bias or intention in any way.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Sorry that I was late. I was curious, do we know any more at this point about vouchers? How many students are utilizing the vouchers in Hamilton County? how many will move from Hamilton County Schools to, I guess, the private school that they'll be using the voucher? Like, do we have any stats yet?
So it didn't officially become the law until basically last week. So we don't have any numbers yet of exactly how many. If you're comparing it to Metro Nashville, in Metro Nashville, they said there's about 700 that are actively using it. There were more that applied that couldn't get into different things. Now, it is also at this point in the bill, and it's an ever-growing bill. That's one of the things to make sure that we're sure about and that we understand. The bill itself is written so that things happen, but it is also written so that it could grow with the need of the bill growing and could offer more money or could offer it to more communities. Because as I've mentioned with the writing of it here, all we had to do was add that there were 5 or more instead of 10 or more as it used to be written, and that made it possible for Hamilton County. Again, Knoxville could have been included, but the bill was wrote them out of it. So what I'm trying to say is right now it's a very small dollar amount that is given. Just for a local example, it wouldn't put somebody into Macaulay or Baylor. But it is a bill that could in the future grow.
So if a parent were to opt into the voucher program, and you said the bill passed last week, would they be allowed to opt into it for this coming school year?
Yes, so they actually, I'm sorry, no. They would have to go through the application process, and I haven't seen details of when that is yet, the dates on it.
Okay.
I have a question. When you were citing like 1920, 2021, did you say something about they can apply for retroactive vouchers?
So according to Public Chapter 171, it allows it so that students can apply back years. Like if they went into a private school at that time, they could apply for it instead of saying, I want to go, I'm going to apply now.
So they can get reimbursed for those school years?
I don't believe it's reimbursement. I believe it's just that they can get into the program.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It is written like they could get into the program, but it could be interpreted.
So they can enter the program even if they're already at private school?
So that is described in Public Chapter 171?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and to say that again on the record, the 2 different public chapters of this education savings account, again, just typically called the vouchers bills, is Public Chapter 328, and then the furtherance is Public Chapter 171. Anybody else? So I know that I'm going a little bit off the agenda, but I just wanted to see, since there are some people in the crowd, if anyone had a question, I would open the floor up to public comment. Dr. Highlander?
Hypothetically, say a church wanted to open a school without accreditation, and was it 8,600 in my ballpark?
Yes.
And they say, okay, we'll take 8,600 from any of our parishioners who want to do. They have volunteer teachers, they can put that in the church commons.
So yes, as long as they are held to 2 different testing models, where the public schools are held to 4, but as long as they have a school and they are a chartered school in the state of Tennessee, then yes.
So when they're testing, they do not do the same process our children do. They can take, say, Stanford Binet or Iowa Reading.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I know that the Diocese of Knoxville, the Catholic school system, takes the Iowa standard test.
Yes.
Johnny, go up front, please, to the microphone, because they're videoing, and that's fine here for you all.
Just was following suit. We're good. No, you're good.
Well,
Hi.
I was gonna say, you wait real quick, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna
No, you're
just
good.
so that's on the record. So Dr. Highlander asked if any church could open up as long as they had teachers and took the tests that are stated by the state that a private school has to take in order to be one of the voucher schools. Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
no, good. I'm Angela Favaloro. Let's see, I think the question I had about the vouchers on that is, so if there is a retroactive possibility and they get into the program, so someone who's never had a child in public school, who's been in private school all the time, as long as they live in Hamilton County, if they join, it's not a retroactive pay, but then they get in, does that fall in, does the state now give extra funds to Hamilton County for the newly enrolled students so that that's not coming from the existing budget? It will be an additional money that comes in from our state.
So I'm not
So,
completely sure how.
because if they're not in existence right now, they're not counted in enrollment. So the money that you're getting does not cover that person. So that's in that savings account. So what I'm saying is when they get into the program, it counts them as basically like an enrollment for our county, then we would get additional funds. So it's not pulling from the same pie that we already have.
No. It really is not, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but really the voucher structure does not actually flow any funds through, am I right about this? Does not flow any funds.
Okay.
So the child doesn't count as a Hamilton County student at all.
Okay.
It's really that you're a Hamilton County citizen.
Okay.
So therefore, in their eyes, you have the right to that voucher money. So
Okay.
as long as that student, I mean, and to how I understand it, and from following doctors for the last 4 or 5 years, if you are a Hamilton County citizen and you never opted your child into public school, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's really just that you were a tax-paying citizen who had a child
Oh,
in
sure.
private school. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not meaning to go back and forth, but I think what I'm hearing is that it is not through the school. It's a direct application to the state, and the state gives the funds directly there, correct?
Yeah, so the funds are
Okay.
actually deposited directly with the parents.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the question for that.
And actually,
ahead.
for the sake of asking the question, so that the general public might know, do you know, are there, Mr. Connor, do you know, are there qualifiers for how the parent spends the money? Like, do they need to like show proof of how they spent the dollars after they receive them?
I mean, it has to go to the school, but that's
Okay.
the extent of it.
But I believe it does pass through the parent.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they get, it goes into the parent's account and then it's paid to the school. They do have to show that they've paid it to the school
Yeah.
in the application process. But-
You're probably thinking of the charter process, which sounds more like what you were describing. Because we get
I didn't know
countless
how
students.
that,
Yeah.
that is
I
the
didn't know
one.
if the voucher system worked similar to that, though it's called a savings account, so it makes sense that it's a separate thing that's handled directly, but I wanted to clarify because that seems pretty confusing.
Yes, thank you.
No, and then on the SRO funding, I know Hamilton County's given us and made an agreement to fund a certain amount of SROs, and then this state gives us the remainder to fill those positions. Is that required to be SROs? But I heard you say that, can they be SSOs? Does it have to be?
So the
Police
school resource,
officers.
the grant through Homeland Security is for a school resource officer. So it does have to be an SRO. And it is, just to go into the details of it, it's the purpose of placing one full-time SRO in each public school. The funding per SRO shall not exceed $75,000 a year. The Department of Safety shall make grants available to local law enforcement entities, which is also where it comes in, because SROs are hired through the sheriff's office,
Yeah.
and SSOs are hired through the Hamilton County Schools.
Okay, and so you said that's a Homeland, so that's a federal funding?
It is a federal grant funding,
Okay.
and the gentleman who wrote the funding actually spoke to Larry and I last week. So it was a very interesting.
Okay,
as
so
Larry
that
put
kind
it was a
of,
lot longer than I made it.
so in other words, what you're saying is that if you chose to eliminate arresting capabilities of officers on campuses and use an SSO, that would come completely from your own funding. You wouldn't have support for those things, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, there's obviously different ways of going about it. There can be deals made. None of those have been made, but this is the way it's
Mm-hmm.
written. And as the gentleman put it at the meeting, he had to write the grant proposal in a week, did he say? Or was it 2 weeks? So it has some things that need to be ironed out. He even admitted to that, but it's a great start for it.
Okay, and then I only have one other thing to ask about, and it was something y'all
Do you
didn't
wanna say-
address.
It was a lot of detail.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the gentleman from Homeland gave us a lot of details. It was really awesome. Again, it was part of why I skimmed over it is the school safety plans are meant to be a little secretive, but it was a lot of information and a lot of good information. Whether or not SRO to SSO is a conversation to be had,
Yeah,
but
sure.
it is a great step in the right direction.
And then there was one law that I know took place at the beginning of July that wasn't discussed. I also didn't realize I could send this to you beforehand, so that's why you didn't have it. Was the obscene material from providers being a felony charge from any of our vendors if they provide a very nondescript obscenity type thing. So I'm just curious if there have been any vendor relationship issues with Scholastic or any of the other literature providers, or if we have seen any reduction to access to literature for any of our students because of this law.
So this the law just became law on the 1st. So I haven't heard of anything that's come up since then. I don't know that it ruffled any feathers before. In the meeting, so what you're talking about is Public Chapter 472, Materials in Library Collections. It creates a new process for submitting complaints regarding materials in the, wait, is that the one? Or nope, I'm
No,
sorry.
it's a different-
This has to do only with providers, so it's not I don't know the number on it, and I should have written that down. But it's,
Prohibition of book distributors, Public Chapter 278.
Yes.
Makes it unlawful for a book distributor to knowingly sell or distribute obscene materials to K-12 public school. Would be a Class E felony and effective July 1.
but the definition for obscenity is not provided. So that's where I was curious if the gray area has provided any hurdles or deterrents to access.
It hasn't, and I believe that to be basically on purpose, so that it's something that is a gray area that will have to either be litigated or best judgment.
Okay, awesome.
And
Thank you.
As we
Well,
do
there have been
approve.
some Supreme Court rulings on obscenity cases, so we will be falling back to those cases, and I guess we could reference them if we
Is that like
need to.
Island Trees versus Pico and some of the older ones that Pinellas?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
They're not any current ones. You're talking about ones that have already been kind of precedent and established,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
yeah, and that's forgive me. What I meant is in our state and in our school system, we have not had any pushback yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Okay.
Appreciate the question.
Yeah. Yes. Ms. Dalton.
Stephanie Dalton. I was just wondering if the ESA funds can be accessed by homeschool students.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's it. So that again is an application process, and it is available to them. There's a slightly different metric because they don't have to take the same testing that the private school would because of the homeschooling. And there is, while we're on that chapter, there is one other regulation for homeschool students unless they participate in a school activity with one of our schools don't have to submit immunization records anymore. So there's been a lot of allowances for homeschool students provided in the last two General Assemblies. So they are available to get those funds. Again, it's a different application process and different application, but the funds are available to them.
I was happy to see Public Charter 165, that homeschoolers' children will be, have access to the arts programs and clubs and events offered by the district, so I was glad to see that.
Absolutely. Like I said, there has been a good amount of homeschool items added in that allow for integration with the kids and some more rules because there weren't any there to begin with.
So actually, what they just brought up, does that mean that they can participate in extracurriculars only, did you say only at charter schools, or?
Oh, no.
Tell me more.
Just that homeschoolers could have access
Okay.
to the same as other students.
So like if somebody's zoned for Red Bank, they could join the chess club if there's space and what have you. Again, if they choose to participate in the schools, then they do need to follow the immunization rules and different things to get on the team. Be there. They have to get their own transportation to the different events. So
What are the logistics of that, Dr. Robertson? Do homeschool families now, do they go directly to the school principal to participate?
Yeah, there's got to be agreements, and we've had these in the past for a number of years where homeschool kids are playing athletics or involved in some extracurricular on our public schools. So they just work with the school principal and arrange for that. There's some steps that have to be taken before they can do it, but this isn't a huge change from past practice.
in the state of Florida, Tim Tebow played football for the local public school when he was homeschooled. I think he did all right.
Well, I've had a family in the past reach out about like sitting in on classes, like not auditing, but right, they're not allowed to do that. Okay, and that this law doesn't change that, right? Okay.
This is specifically extracurriculars.
Question. Did the voucher bill that extends financial support to homeschool, did it list like what those expenses could and could not be? Like, could they pay for staff for a learning pod, or is it curriculum only?
So I don't know if there's any rules on what exactly it has to be paid for, because the reason is when you give the money on the other side to the private school, it is just a check written to the private school for tuition. So that could entail food, room and board, depending on which school you're at. So I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to look into it.
I mean, that brings up some concerns for me, because if it does apply to like staffing for a learning pod, are there the same requirements for certification that there are at private schools and at public schools?
So what I'm doing is I'm noting that, and I will bring the answer back in my report at our meeting next week. Dr. Highlander?
My old teacher voice probably would carry from back there, but correct me if I'm wrong, and Dr. Robertson, Dr. Stewart may help me, but private schools do not have certification requirements like public schools do.
No.
So homeschools obviously would not either,
Right.
so.
That's true. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these questions, and again, if anyone's watching at home, my email is connor_ben@hcde.org, and I welcome any questions. If I can answer them to you in the email, I will do so. If it's something that seems like it needs to be brought up in the general public, I'll add it to my report at the end of the meeting on the 20th. But again, I welcome any questions. I have mentioned many times before how much I love all of this legal stuff, and I am that kind of nerd, so test me. Thank you very much for coming out. I don't have any announcements other than that. I will answer any questions publicly or via email, and I look forward to seeing you all at our standard board meeting. Meeting adjourned.